Sandra Wilson here, clinical hypnotherapist, and today's video is about that annoying trait that many women with ADHD have, which is rumination, overthinking, poring over perceived insults or things that people have said to you that have made you unhappy. Raking over old pain, old situations, arguments you've had months and months ago with people who, you're easily triggered by, like mothers or brothers or partners, best friends, bosses. So why do we do that? I mean, rumination is a common problem that can happen when we're anxious. And it can be very, very stubborn, a very difficult habit pattern to break. So you might find yourself going round and round in circles, going over every little detail of something somebody said to you, a conversation perhaps that may have resulted in an argument. You might have ideas about what you could have said or should have said. You might have a mental movie of being really angry and lashing out at that person because deep down you feel that you should have stood your ground and maybe you didn't. And perceived insults. Perhaps somebody said something to you that you took to heart when you have really no evidence that they meant it in a unpleasant, unfriendly way. And a client I had fairly recently said that she spent a whole night tossing and turning in absolute fury because she thought that a person had said something that she'd actually misheard, so it turned out. That's a whole night of lost sleep, feeling this fury towards somebody in her workplace when she just had misunderstood. And of course, by the time she then went to address it with them, which that in itself was a big enough problem because she does not like conflict, another symptom of ADHD, by that time the resentment had built up so much that she couldn't really stay calm enough, and she ended up just not exactly losing her temper, but being quite heated and ending up just storming off. And the person then said, well, actually, that is not how I meant it. So can you see how the brain, especially an anxious brain or a neurodiverse brain, a brain that's had a lot of trauma in the past, can misperceive certain things, conversations, things people say. And it's so important to just be mindful that you do have a choice, that you can take a step back and just consider other possibilities. Remember that when you're triggered, it tends to be a trigger from something that happened to you in the past. And it's not uncommon for women with ADHD to have had so many negative messages growing up, so many being called daydreamer, lazy, not good enough, whatever, so much negative emotional conditioning that if somebody says something that triggers you in the present, it's going to trigger all that old stuff. Okay, so do you find yourself ruminating, going over old arguments, thinking about what somebody said and what they might have meant, and that you've taken something very, very personally, that you've perhaps maybe being a little oversensitive and you're blowing it all up in your mind? There is another way that you can look at it, and it does require patience and I guess a little bit of time. So you can take a pause, take a breath, refocus your attention. I know it's difficult, but just focus on something you enjoy. Often time will make things feel better. We've all had arguments with people that after a good night's sleep or a couple of days have passed and it doesn't seem quite so bad, the anger subsides. But when you just will not let it lie, when you're like a dog with a bone, you're going round and round and round in circles, something needs your attention. You've been triggered. And what is it? What does it remind you of? Yes, you can take a deep breath. Yes, you can pause and reflect, but try to remember, when did you first feel that way? What does it remind you of? So does that particular situation remind you of a time way, way back when you felt angry, disempowered, very upset, diminished, ridiculed, whatever? And if a memory comes up for you, then you can try to make peace with it. Remember that when you're very, very young, you're not really gifted with perspective or an ability to see things in a different way. We're very reactive as children, teenagers. So, I mean, rumination is a huge problem for many people with ADHD, but just having a look at the content and the context of this ruminating pattern can sometimes give you some good insights. So I hope that's been helpful. I'll be back with more tomorrow. Bye for now.